But now we're asking if expats should be allowed a vote. Give us a call. 0207 862 2222 is the number. I'll speak to you in just a moment. Now, the voting rules have just changed, meaning that Brits who have lived overseas for more than 15 years will now get a chance to vote here. Previously, if you lived away from the UK for that length of time, you would lose your voting rights. Now, this means that up to 3 million more people will be eligible to vote in this year's general election. So is it a good idea, or should you only get to have a say if you stay here? What do you think, Jenny?
Well, I can understand that people might say, if you're not living in this country, you shouldn't have a say what happens. But if you are a British citizen, you are still affected by what the British government decides. So, for example, if there was a world war and there was conscription, you could be conscripted. If we decided to do something in foreign policy terms that meant that you were no longer welcome in vast swathes of the world, that you couldn't get a visa to go to certain places, you would be very much affected. You might suddenly find that the home that you'd lived in for a long time was now a hostile environment because of your British passport. So if you choose to retain a British passport, it makes sense that you should have a say in who governs the country, because potentially the decisions made by that government could affect you very seriously. You could be asked to die for your country because of those decisions.
That's a compelling argument, Mike.
Well, I'm totally against this idea of expats having the vote at all. I didn't even know they could do it for the first 15 years, and now they can do it, ad infinitum. I think it's a disgrace. I had a mate, in Fleet Street, and he packed up early because he found out that if he sold his house in Thames Ditton and went out to Spain and bought a villa, he could have not only his company pension paid out there, his state pension, right? Do you know we pay state pensions to people overseas when they live overseas?
Aren't you arguing against yourself here? Because if somebody is getting pensions in Britain, that means that they are directly impacted by...
I don't think they should get them. This is the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that once you leave our shores and go and live in another country, then as far as I'm concerned...
You have to emigrate.
Your loyalties lie to that country that you are residing in. Loads of people went to France and bought geets and all that. Now, the reason they do it is to benefit themselves. In booze, for instance, my mate went there because booze was 1/4 the price that it is here. Properties was half the price. He could have a swimming pool that he couldn't afford here, and he's luxuriating in front of his swimming pool. I'm still working, my socks off in this country.
You're still here in this studio.
Yeah.
And he's luxuriating, that's a word.
And he thinks he's got the right to come back and vote on the way this country's run when I'm actually making the country work and he's lazing on a sun lounger in Marbella.
This is a great point to bring in our next guest. So joining us from Luxembourg is Fiona Godfrey from the campaign group British in Europe. Fiona, thank you very much for joining us. I think we're cutting off half your face there. If you could just stand back. Lovely, we can see your full face now. I know you don't like the term expat, so I'm going to try and avoid using it. But just tell us a little bit why you don't like the term expat.
It's because, like anybody else who leaves their country, we're emigrants, and then we move to our new country and we are immigrants, just like anybody else. Expat is a bit of an old-fashioned term, and we tend to use emigrant and immigrant these days.
So do you welcome the change then to the rules in that you will be able to vote in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted. I'm one of the 3 million who's got their voting rights back this week, and the response from Brits living all over the world has been absolutely astounding. We've had people voting and registering to vote for the last 48 hours. We've had over 10,000 people register, and people have been registering in Australia, in Taiwan, in France, in Germany, all over the world. It's been great to see.
What is it that affects you? Because if you've lived abroad for, let's say, 40 years, how can you still be affected by what's happening here?
Well, I mean, in one word, you could say for any one of the 1.2 million Brits living in the EU, Brexit really affected our daily lives in a massive way, and 60% of us have no say in the referendum. We couldn't vote in that massive decision that was made by the UK. But I think, I take really take on board and support the points that Jenny just made. But actually, I registered to vote this week, and I'm going to be voting later in the year in the general election on the same issues as lots of people living in the UK. So, for example, I have a half-brother living in London who has motor neurone disease, and a mum living in Yorkshire who has heart disease. And of course, they both are really reliant on the NHS, and they're really reliant on social care. And if they don't get that, then if they don't get it in a timely way, then it's hard for them, but it's also really, really hard for me, and it affects me even though I don't live in the country. So that's just one of the issues. And then last week we had an email from a young woman called Emily, who is a teacher in Italy. She's British, she's married to an Italian man, she's got a couple of young children, and she really wants to move back to the UK so that her children can grow up with their grandparents and British cousins. But because of the changes announced before Christmas to the minimum income requirement, she's not going to be able to do that. So her daily life is directly impacted, as is mine.
That's huge, actually. That really brings it home, doesn't it, Mike, and why people living abroad should be able to still get the vote.
Yeah, but I can't understand. If you go and live in another country, and Fiona lives in Luxembourg, and I don't know if it's for financial reasons or not, Fiona, but most people go and live somewhere else because they're better off financially, so they take all the advantages of the lower cost of living, but still want to interfere in the affairs of the United Kingdom.
Even if that was the case, Mike, let's say that you're absolutely right on that, which everybody else is shaking their head in the panel. But let's say that you're right. Isn't that just globalisation? Isn't that just somebody taking an opportunity? And as a capitalist, you should applaud that.
No, not at all. Globalisation is one thing, but actually having a direct interest in the community in which you were born and brought up and live in means that you have a vote there to control that community. If you then go and have a life elsewhere, the Rolling Stones pushed off to the south of France purely for tax reasons, right? Now, I couldn't see the Stones...
trickling down there.
Yeah. I couldn't see the Stones wanting to, get involved in voting in Britain. They did it purely for money, as most people do. So why should you have the best of both worlds?
Fiona, answer that question. Why should you have the best of both worlds?
Because we're British citizens and voting is a fundamental citizenship right, and it shouldn't matter where you live in the world. If you're a British citizen, if you choose to keep your British passport, then you should have voting rights. And
you should still be a British citizen, to be honest.
So if you leave the country, you need to give up your passport.
The UK government allows me to keep my British citizenship right, but we live in the 21st century, so it doesn't take 3 months now to get a letter from Australia back to the UK. Everything is. We're in contact with our families on a daily basis through WhatsApp or Skype, and we read about British politics in the media every day on the internet. It's completely changed, and nearly every Western democracy accepts that if you are a citizen of a country, you should have voting rights, and it doesn't matter where you live. And America, France, Poland, Chile, Italy, they allow lifelong voting rights for their citizens because they understand that it is about citizenship, and that's really all it comes down to. Are you a citizen? If yes, you should be entitled to vote.
I suppose this move brings us in line with those countries as well. Fiona Godfrey from British in Europe, thank you very much for your contribution there and getting involved in this discussion. Lots of calls on the line, all from the UK. I thought maybe we'd get some international ones. We're going to go to my neck of the woods. This is Lynn from Glasgow. What's your thoughts? Should they get to vote?
Good morning, Storm. Good morning, panel. I never usually agree with Mike, but on this, he is 100% right. For somebody abroad to influence what happens with our government, which means that they are in turn influencing what we are living under. Now, why should somebody have that?
But Lynn, it's but as a British citizen, it is their government still too, even if they are sleeping at night in a different country.
Yeah, but they've chose to leave.
Yeah.
But what if they could be sent to war? What if they could be sent to war? What if they might be in
very extreme
well, but it potentially could happen. What if they could be made unwelcome in the country in which they live?
Right, I understand that there's, but again, that to me that is extreme. But another way to look at it, we've got kids leaving school at 16 who are out earning a wage that don't get to dictate what happens with our government because they don't have a right to vote.
In Scotland, they certainly did in the referendum, and that might be another thing that we bring up in later times. But these are not 16-year-olds; these are fully fledged adults with pensions and spouses. And actually, hearing from Fiona there, the thought that you have moved to another country, you are with a spouse, neither of you have the potential to earn particularly a large amount of money, would stop you from being able to move back to your hometown, to your home country, to be with your family as you get older. That's detrimental, is it not?
No, it wouldn't, because if you've got a British passport, you can come back into Britain. You don't come
bring your family. You can't bring your husband and your children.
But that's international rules. International rules are, that's
That's
sort
not
of,
international rules.
Thresholds in this country.
That is all about immigration. Lynn is absolutely right. If you live abroad, why should you every 4 years have the right to try and influence the way this country is run when you don't even live here? That's what I think is the nonsense of it all.
All right, Lynn, thank you very much for your call. Lots coming in. Angela from Blackpool, what's your views on this? Mike's quite tough on it. He thinks after 2 years living abroad, that's it. You get your passport removed, no right to vote, and off you pop.
Well, hi. I think if holding a British passport should give you some claim to the British government. If there's a problem in the country where you are, then you would expect the British government to help you out and get you out of that country. That is what happens. But people with holding a British passport that are living in a different country or working at sea, for instance, will not be contributing to the taxes. So I'd say if you want to contribute to the voting system, you also, with holding a British passport, must contribute to the taxes.
I got you, but Angela, what if they did contribute to the British taxes? They now have a pension in this country, and so they are still tied, even if they are no longer. And also, some expats do still contribute to taxes in this country. But let's go with your view that they're no longer doing it, but they have done it before, and they now have a pension that ties them back to Britain.
Yeah, that's fine. That is what they've contributed to, but now they're in a different situation, which holds different requirements. Perhaps, if I'm living in this country and I'm still putting into the tax system in this country in some way, even by purchasing.
It's a really interesting point that you bring up. I just want to put it to Jenny. What about that for a rule that actually your British passport, yes, you still have a tie to this country, but actually you only get a chance to vote if you're still paying taxes, if you're financially continuing to contribute.
I do think that if you're a citizen, you should have the responsibilities of being a citizen, which means you should be paying taxes. But even then, I mean, my argument, which holds, is that you are affected by what our government does. If you are a British citizen, no matter where you are, you would. If you're in a foreign country and our government decides to do something that is hostile to that country, you will be a target as a consequence of being a British citizen. So I still think you should have a right to vote, but I do think you should pay taxes.
Angela, thank you very much for your call. Nice food for thought there. Linnea from Fife, lots of calls coming in from Scotland, which is lovely. What's your thoughts on this? Do you get a vote if you move abroad?
No, I'm afraid not. Good morning. I may have to go back to bed. Never in this universe did I ever think I would agree with Mike Parry.
OK, you can go for a wee nap.
I'm in shock.
In a wee way.
I just think it's a slippery. I just think it's a slippery slope. I mean, does this mean that the Northern Irish can vote in a Scottish independence referendum? Can the English vote in a Northern Irish independence or a Welsh referendum?
Oh, I see, because they don't necessarily live in that country, but they are a British passport holder. It actually is a fair point to make there, Jenny.
I think you could very clearly define whether or not you can vote. I think in the Scottish referendum, Scottish people who were, or British people who were living in Scotland couldn't vote, could they? And not British,
yes,
English
but
people. I think that's something that you could get around, that most people would balk at the idea of English people voting in a Scottish referendum.
And also, Linnea, when you live abroad, you vote in the constituency that you last resided. Presumably, if you're English or has always lived in England, it'd be very hard for you to give a constituency in Scotland to be able to vote there. So there's probably rules and ways and means that you can...
I see. Yeah, absolutely. But if we had this introduced in 2016, Brexit would not have happened.
Yeah,
potentially.
Can I just say, because I think I should speak to you, as it's the one time in your life you've agreed with me. You've made such a good point. Can I put this to you, Linnea? There's a huge market around the world in black market British passports, right? They're extremely valuable because we're one of the best countries in the world and people want to come here. So if you've got the privilege of holding a British passport but choose to live abroad, you are taking the mickey if you then want all the privileges that go with that British passport, even though you don't live here.
Interesting. All of these points have been very interesting. I think we've made lots of people very angry as well. Linnea, thank you very much for that point. Thanks for all the calls. We are...